Christmas. You know, you think of opening the presents around the tree in the morning, a nice Christmas dinner, hopefully a little snow on the ground. You know, we're all dreaming of a white Christmas. And then, you know, most people get to stay home and enjoy that day with their family, but American servicemen, regardless of where they serve, they don't always have that ability. You know, sometimes their job is to be on guard no matter what happens. And during Cold War years especially, our servicemen and women had to be on guard for the ever-present threat of our foreign enemies. And so, as Christmas Day gives way to Christmas night and most people get to snuggle down into their beds, an incident happened in Rendlesham Forest in England, which found American servicemen running through the woods in pursuit of a strange, unknown flying object. And we're going to talk about the Rendlesham Forest Incident tonight.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
You know, this is one of those topics that I have to say I really enjoy, and that's one of the unexplained phenomenon of UFO. It's just the fact that, you know, we have so much new technology and almost everyone nowadays has, you know, a camera right there with them on their phone. We're able to capture a lot more stuff that, you know, even 2-3 decades ago wouldn't be possible.
And yet we still can't get a clear picture of a Bigfoot.
Right. It doesn't make sense. I think it's maybe, well, never mind. We're discovering more and more planets and solar systems and just how vast the universe may truly be. And I personally think, and some may disagree with me, but I personally think it's almost foolish for us to consider we are the only ones that exist on any planet, any universe, any solar system. You know, there's been thousands and thousands of reported UFO incidents over the past century, and probably more than 80% have just occurred in the past 50 years. You know, recently we've talked about, and you've probably saw online, there was some footage that was leaked by a filmmaker by the name of Jeremy Corbell. It was some video footage that was taken by the Navy off the coast of what I believe was California. And it clearly shows a triangle or pyramid-shaped craft that had pulsating lights that moved across the sky. Then, of course, earlier in 2000, there was the U.S. military released and admitted for the first time. They had U.S. Navy and Air Force trying to track this super fast flying object. We saw that all over the internet and, you know, where they were able to ping it. You know, it just leads to more questions. You know, are these crafts manned by some alien life form? Are they a national threat? Are they friendly, possibly inquisitive visitors from another galaxy? Or maybe, as some would believe, time travelers trying to communicate and warn us of impending doom?
Travelers from another dimension seems to be another common theory.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just another one of those examples that we're going to talk about tonight for our Christmas special, if you will, with Rendlesham Forest. At the very least, you know, I find it refreshing that finally the military has admitted that they have been aware of such events when just 30, 40 years ago, most would have laughed at people like ourselves or people that tried to believe. I think it's adding integrity to those of us who have always believed.
Speaking of UFOs and the Rendlesham Forest Incident.
Suffolk, England.
Yeah, Suffolk, England. So this occurred on the night of, I say night of, but it would be early morning on December 26th.
The day after Christmas
night, you know, the next day, and continued for another day or so on the 28th. There's a lot of notable events. This group of, this sighting happened just outside the Royal Air Force Station Woodbridge, which at the time was being used by the United States Air Force. It was kind of a lease kind of thing, or I'm not sure exactly how it worked.
That seems like a weird situation.
Yeah.
I mean, did they rent it to us, or, you know, how does that work?
We had United States Air Force personnel occupying this. Well, occupying might be the wrong word to use. They were using this English air station. So the bulk of the Rendlesham sighting is basically that the airmen there, over the course of a couple of days, claimed to have seen what they described as UFO, an unidentified flying object, that seemed to have descended into the forest at one point and then kind of zipped and traveled around. We're going to go into more detail on that. But over the course of a couple of days, they just saw this unexplained phenomenon. And a lot of it was documented by Lieutenant Colonel Charles I. Halt, who seemed to be, he's a guy who went from skeptic to believer over the course of a couple of days here, and we'll talk about that too. But most of what we know about Rendlesham Forest comes from Halt.
Now, I will say, I wasn't familiar with Rendlesham Forest. I'd heard of it, but it's about 100 miles to the northeast of London, and the entire forest is pretty thick, and it encompasses about 6 square miles.
Yeah,
and
just
then,
about 6 square miles of coniferous, so pine tree
types.
That kind of tree.
Now, again, as we were talking earlier before we started recording, there was 2 bases kind of adjacent of each other, one on one end of the forest, one on the other. And the other was by the Royal Air Force. They still had it. And then we had the one leased or whatever from them. So, the United States was there.
But yeah, Rendlesham Forest is considered in UFO circles, it's considered UK's equivalent to the Roswell UFO incident here in America.
I love that.
I mean, they're very similar. Now, there's all sorts of claims when it comes to Rendlesham, and I'm going to try to stick to the most believable version of the story. There's some very outlandish claims, and I'll kind of filter in a little bit as we go, and you may have read about some of these in your research. But basically, we'll just start. First of all, the official record states this event posed no threat to national security, and therefore it was never investigated as a threat to national security. It's rumored that at the time, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher told everyone, don't tell the people. They didn't want it reported. They didn't want people worried about these
maybe
UFOs
panicking
the
people. Yeah. But again, it's U.S. Air Base with unidentified lights, but it's not a national threat.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, again, this was Cold War, so there's a lot of strange
Define
things.
National threat, yeah.
Our primary pieces of evidence for the Rendlesham Forest incident come from a number of sources. Number one is the Halt memo, again written by Lieutenant Colonel James I. Halt, who was deputy base commander at the time. This was made available under the Freedom of Information Act in 1983. It was dated January 13th, 1981, under the title Unexplained Lights. You have the Halt tape, which Halt and his crew, when they went out to investigate, brought a handheld tape recorder with them to record, to make a real-time recording of what was happening as they investigated. You have the Halt affidavit, which is signed and notarized on June of 2010, stating his belief that the event was extraterrestrial in origin. Like I said, this event made Halt change his opinion from skeptic to believer. He believes now in these
literally
things.
within about 48 hours.
You also have the Suffolk police log documenting police involvement at the time, which they were called in to help investigate. And, of course, their report says there's nothing unusual was found at the time. Now, if you look online, you can actually find a copy of some of the Suffolk police records from the time, and they'll talk about reports of strange lights, but then eventually their investigation kind of leads them to find nothing.
Well, and I believe they were kind of leaning to a nearby lighthouse that the police were trying to basically blow it off. Well, the soldiers saw this reflection of this lighthouse that was off the coast.
Well, towards the end of my notes here, I get into possible explanations. The lighthouse does come up a lot. And I mean, people literally have tried to pick this one apart and say, well, it could be this, it could be that. They report seeing star-like objects in the sky moving around at different, odd angles and extreme speeds. And literally astronomers are like, well, you just saw stars. Well, I don't know about you, but
I think I would
recognize
that.
Yeah, a lot of stars don't move and send beams of light down. So.
They're also not red usually.
Yeah. So about 3 a.m. on the morning of December 26th, so again, after most people have had their Christmas day and settled their brains, down for sleep.
In 1980.
Airman First Class John Burroughs is on security patrol near the east gate of Woodbridge. He's with a partner, and, again, they're just patrolling the base, which anyone in the military, I'm sure, is familiar with that procedure. And at some point, like I said, about 3 a.m., they see lights descend into Rendlesham Forest. So, of course, being concerned and being good soldiers the way they are, they go back to a nearby post and they call it into their superior to let them know, hey, we've seen something. We need to do something about this. About the same time, another patrol arrives at this post and they confirm that they, too, saw lights descend into Rendlesham Forest.
Mm-hmm.
They were sent off base to investigate. Now, because this base is kind of on one side of Rendlesham Forest. You said there's another base that's located adjacent to Rendlesham Forest.
Mm-hmm.
Rendlesham Forest itself is this wooded area, about 6 acres, like you said. So to explore Rendlesham Forest, they have to leave the base. Now, since they're stationed overseas, I guess they're not allowed to take weapons with them when they leave the base. So they are going out to investigate a UFO without weapons. Now, these are military guys, which I'm pretty sure they're used to bringing weapons with them. And I don't know about you, but charging off into a strange forest to hunt down a potential... At the time, they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
This is the Cold War. For all they know, the Russians have parachuted down into Rendlesham Forest.
Right.
And they're going out there without any guns. So these are some brave guys.
Now, I think that same night, and maybe you were going to touch upon this, I think the first alert was a farmer had reported seeing a upside-down shaped mushroom craft vehicle that was hovering above his garden just a few moments before 3 a.m. when the guards saw it at the east gate.
Well, the sightings are not specifically limited just to the airmen and such, so I know that there were other sightings in the surrounding area.
But again, kind of setting that integrity, there was several people who saw this event.
Since they're leaving American jurisdiction, like I said, they leave their weapons behind and they go off into Rendlesham Forest to figure out what it is that's going on. Now, their initial assumption is that this is a downed aircraft. Obviously, that's the simple explanation. Somebody crashed.
Mm-hmm.
They never heard a crash to accompany that or explosion or anything like that.
Well, and this base was the home of the A-10 Thunderbolt II, which was the anti-tank fighter jet. So again, I mean, this was an airstrip, and it would stand to reason. Maybe somebody was trying to do a forced emergency landing and didn't make it.
According to Halt's memo, what they saw was a strange glowing object. Described it as being metallic in appearance, triangular in shape, approximately 9 feet across the base and 9 feet high. So it'd be in a triangular shape, but, pretty sizable. Yeah, like you said, the size of a car.
About the size of a car.
Some accounts also said it was covered in hieroglyph-like markings.
Thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was...
With the glyphs being as tall as 3 foot.
Wow, no, okay, I didn't find any...
Yeah, I saw some reference to that, and I went back and reread it a couple times. Like, that's some big letters.
Now, according to the gentleman that found it, the object illuminated the entire forest with a bright light, and it had a pulsing red light on top and a bank of blue lights underneath, and appeared to be sitting on 3 legs like a tripod. An airman by the name of Peniston approached the craft and touched it, at which point it sped off at impossible speed through the forest. And they said that while in the presence of the object, everything felt slower or strange.
Yeah, soupy, like time was being distorted and all of that.
Now, in later accounts, Peniston himself will actually go on to claim that the object implanted binary code into his brain.
Yeah, he said maybe looking back on it, touching it was probably, not the best possible solution.
But his story kind of gets inflated over the years. But they also report that animals on a nearby farm were in a frenzy. You could hear animals all over the place.
It was also,
going nuts.
I'd found as the men approached the vessel ship, their radio transmission started acting up. So there was some type of an interference. There were 3 soldiers at that point. One stayed back at the edge of the woods as the other 2 went in to investigate so that they could yell, and then the one that could still get radio reception could, broadcast that in. And they were talking about, like you said, there was this kind of thick soupiness that kind of delayed them. But then the 2 men that approached, they said once they got within about 10 foot, that kind of like let up and it was normal again. So it was almost like there was a dome, a bubble, if you will, around this craft.
So for the next 2 hours, they played kind of a cat and mouse game with this object through the forest, with it appearing specifically documented near the back gate of Woodbridge again. Peniston, in his official document, I have here Sergeant Jim Peniston, he claimed to encounter a craft of unknown origin. That's the only way he could term it. So later, shortly after 4 a.m., the local police were called in, so that's where the Suffolk police blotter comes into account. Like they were called in. According to the police, the only reported lights they saw while they were there were from the Orford Ness Lighthouse, which this lighthouse comes into the story quite a bit away.
Yep.
This particular lighthouse is miles away on the coast. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more as we go. Shortly after daybreak, some servicemen went out and they found a small clearing on the eastern edge of the forest where there were 3 impressions in the ground in a triangular pattern where the craft had apparently come to rest. The depressions were 1 1/2 inch deep and about 7 inches in diameter. So it does sound like some kind of circular, like landing gear.
Landing gear.
There were burn marks and broken branches on nearby trees. And about 10:30 a.m., the local police are called in again to view these impressions, and they say, they could have been made by an animal. So the local police were not having it.
Those crazy rabbits.
Involved. Yeah.
Wascally wabbits. Now, you had mentioned, Jim Peniston. He was one of the main officers there. I thought it was worth mentioning, he was a trained propulsion engineer. He had studied and researched every form of engine and craft known to man, including Russian and other ones. I mean, that was part of his task in the military. And as he approached the ship, he noted that there were no seams, no bolts or rivets, and in between the flashing lights, he had peered at the material trying to figure out what it was like, and he described it as, upon getting close before he touched it, it was almost like black glass. However, when he decided, whether it be good or bad, to touch it,
Let's reach out and touch this strange alien spaceship.
Yeah, he touched one of these, as it was stated, 3-foot tall runes, and the black glass then took on a different texture, he said, almost like sandpaper.
And again, his story has kind of been embellished over the years.
Like
so
most stories
his original
passed
account
on.
is, I touched the object. And then later on, it was
beamed black glass
stuff directly into my brain.
And there was a lights emitted that temporarily blinded him for several minutes. And yeah.
So we move on to the events of December 28th, the early hours. So December 27th kind of goes by uneventful. The 28th, the early hours, Base Commander Lieutenant Halt goes out to the site with several other servicemen. They take radiation readings in the clearing where the impressions are found with a standard U.S. military radiation survey meter. If you've ever watched the HBO series Chernobyl, you're going to hear a familiar word here in a minute. They recorded 0.1 milliroentgen, which is a measurement of radiation, and I'm not sure exactly what we're measuring, but obviously like extremely high levels, that's what kills people.
Yeah, and I think they said it was like twice the normal amount of what would be considered normal.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of background radiation that we experience at all times.
So it was
that was higher than average.
Yeah.
They also found that the nearby trees were giving off slightly higher readings, 0.05 and to 0.07. So again, slightly higher than the surrounding area.
And they had said that part of the trees had been burned, singed, and that type of deal.
And broken branches.
Mm-hmm.
They detected a small burst about a half a mile away from the landing site that they documented. Now, during this investigation, a flashing light was seen across the field to the east, and almost in line with a farmhouse, and similar to what they had witnessed the first night. And again, the Oxford Nest Lighthouse is visible further east along this same line of sight. And again, we'll talk about that lighthouse a couple of times. People keep wanting to put off that, they saw the lighthouse, and I think you have a little more on that as we get later on. So the night of the 28th, about 9:30 p.m., more lights are spotted, and Halt decides they're going to set up some floodlights out in the forest. If there's going to be something running around the woods, they're going to see it.
We're going to try to be as prepared as we can be.
There were also other strange phenomenon. Gear would malfunction. The floodlights themselves would kind of flicker. So there was definitely something going on in the woods that night. Base security was dispatched to replace lights that were malfunctioning, and Halt sent out a photographer with him to take pictures just in case. If he saw something, they wanted to document what was going on. He was all about documenting, and I think he did a fairly good job under the circumstances.
And I think, as we were talking, I think this is not only from a government standpoint, but I think the man's trying to prove it to himself, what he's saying, because he was a skeptic, and he became a believer, and he's like, I know what I saw. I want to prove this.
Yeah, the events of this night, according to Halt himself, are what made him a believer. So they do eventually see a red sun-like light moving through the trees. It moved and it pulsed, it zigzagged and winked at them as it, I say winked, but and they're
that
probably
was a
blinking
term
on
that
and
was
off.
used.
But yeah, they
actually described
wink.
one of the lights as like a giant eyeball that would wink at them. I thought that's odd.
As it moved around, they followed it. They eventually followed it to a farmhouse, and as they approached this farmhouse, it was glowing as if it were on fire. They saw the object at that point begin moving toward the farmhouse, and it then broke up into 5 separate objects that were now white in color, which shot into the sky and disappeared. Immediately after that, they see 3 star-like lights in the sky, 2 to the north, 1 to the south, and they're all about 10 degrees above the horizon. The objects move rapidly in sharp angular movements, which if when you're looking at UFOs, you look for this extreme speeds and impossible angles. Airplanes and helicopters, they don't just turn on a dime.
Right.
UFOs can, shift direction almost immediately.
Gravity and logic, yeah.
They displayed red, green, and blue lights. Sergeant Ball, who was on the investigation team, his impression was that they were moving in what he called a grid search pattern. So it was like these lights were looking for something. At one point, a light dove from the sky and straight towards a group of observers, flew through a truck, and then back into the sky. And then Colonel Halt was also outside at one point, and a light dropped from the sky towards him and his group. A beam of light came down within feet of contacting him,
Now, I'm envisioning, like, seriously, Close Encounters of the Third Kind here. This vessel, whatever, is up here, and this huge beam of light just kind of beams down on the ground and almost like spotlighting the people down below looking at them.
Basically, yeah, is what it sounds like.
Merry Christmas.
So, but this light comes within feet of them and then just disappears. And Halt is on record as saying that is the moment he changed from skeptic to believer. He believes what happened at that moment. And that is sort of the bulk of the Rendlesham Forest encounter. And I don't know if you have any other accounts that...
Yeah, the forest area, we'll call it the landing site, for lack of a better term. You know, as it was mentioned, the vessel they had kind of followed. At some point, they said it was hovering as they were following it, maybe 12 inches above the ground. But where they found the landing platform impressions, if you will, or the landing gear impressions, those trees had been burnt. We talked about there had been radiation that had been detected.
Broken branches.
And now, in the 80s, when this took place, that area was documented as full-grown trees. You know, I'm envisioning probably 30 foot tall or so. Yeah. But after that event, the trees began to kind of die. And to the point, like, I want to say it was 1993 to 1995 era, they went in and actually cleared part of that and replanted trees, you know, trying to just make it better or more natural. The trees that to this day have never grown back. They didn't die, but it was like their growth was stunted, so they're never more than like 2 or 3 feet tall, which again kind of lends some credence there that whatever it was, something radiation happened. Or whatever, something changed that ground.
Well, I do have a later that same December, because you can't have a good UFO story without a couple of well-dressed gentlemen being involved. There was a Vince Thurkettle, and he was visited in his home by 2 men dressed in suits.
The Men in Black.
He said they appeared to be about in their 30s. They were smartly dressed, but they were dressed in suits. They asked him if he'd been out that previous night. He said no, he was at home, he was minding his own business. When he responded no, they asked again, did you leave your house at all? Did you see anything last night? He said no, and then he said, why? And they said, well, there were reports of some lights seen in Rendlesham Forest. We were just kind of checking. Said they asked about 20 questions politely but firmly, you know, insisted that he answer whatever they asked. And then they left after saying, okay, oh, well, fair enough. There's probably nothing in it. And then they left. So he was a local. He thought they were journalists. And so he watched the papers for a couple days, figuring this story would pop up. And he never saw a story about it. So kind of thinks that maybe they weren't journalists.
Well, I think a couple things worth discussing a bit more was how... And I'm going to pick on the police here for a little bit, the Suffolk police. You know, they dismissed it, of course, as the lighthouse. They then dismissed the imprints at the possible landing site as something done by animals.
Yeah, animals could have done it.
Well, first off, these are trained military personnel. These are Air Force pilots and soldiers. You have to know they are very familiar with aircraft of the day.
Well, and you would have to assume, being in that area, I mean, they were probably there Cold War purposes.
Yeah, I'm sure they had training on, you know, guys, this is some of the things we need to be looking for. You know, obviously, as we talked, it was kind of odd that it's occurred in Britain, but it took place, I guess you would say, on temporary U.S. military base property.
Well, the events themselves happened in the forest.
In the forest.
So UFO, American personnel were involved. But
true. One of the funniest stories I thought was, and I couldn't really find the source, but someone had suggested Britain's military was actually playing with the United States Air Force team, like staging an event.
I did read that. I don't remember. Was it the SAS? I think is their special?
That may have been.
But yeah, like they had dropped down, they helicoptered in or something,
just to mess with them,
just to mess with us Yankees.
And of course, the Brits were very quickly to say, "No, it was not us. Why would we do that?" You know. But then we're going to go back to this lighthouse, the Orford Ness Lighthouse, I believe.
It comes up a lot. Apparently, it's their kind of line of sight from some of the places they would have been that day.
Off the coast there, it was speculated, you know, it was the source of lights. However, again, I mean, these soldiers were based here. The lighthouse didn't just come on one night randomly.
Snuck up on them.
Yeah, it's like, you know, again, they would have to be familiar with that. And even if it was a new guy that just got, stationed there, his other soldier friends are going to be like, oh, no, that happens every night. But in addition to this, there was an investigation done, I think it was in 2010 or 2012, where a group of researchers independently went over and they talked to the lighthouse keeper and they went through some of the history of the lighthouse. First and most primary, there is a giant steel plate that's actually used to block the majority of the light from the land side. Now, if you think about that, that makes very good sense.
Okay, now, I'm not a lighthouse expert, but I've seen movies and I've played video games. Now, I believe lighthouse has a spinning light,
Yes.
a big giant mirror type affair with a light in front of it, so it projects a beam of light out.
To the ocean or the sea.
Well, the idea being that you're projecting this light out so ships at sea don't come too close to the shore.
Exactly.
Rocky, they don't want to
Reefs or
reach
whatever.
on the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Now this light spins around.
Yes.
Again, if there's a shield, because you don't
It's
need
going
to
to
see
be the
that.
lack of light.
You don't need to see that light on the land.
No.
You don't need
No
to see it
reason
on the land side of it. You only need it on the ocean side. So yeah, it makes sense that they would put something to block it.
Yes. Now, obviously, you're going to maybe tell as that light is rotating that, hey, we got light up. We didn't have light for a few seconds. Oh, we got the light back again. But that would not explain the beams that they said that the Air Force men were seeing. But that shield was made to reflect that back out to what I believe is the North Sea. So again, that to me was just absolutely frivolous. That made no sense whatsoever. They interviewed, I guess it was a historical society for the lighthouse. And, they said, well, we've got to ask, maybe was that added later? And they said, oh no, that's part of the original design. It's been there since day one. So to me, I'm just going to cross that off the chalkboard. That doesn't make sense at all.
A lot of skeptics claim that there's multiple explanations for what was seen that night. Apparently, there was a fireball that astronomers document flew through the sky, and that possibly they saw debris from it that looked like it was landing in the forest. Okay.
Again,
little
gravity would
shaped craft.
pull it down in a direction.
They want to blame the Orford Ness Lighthouse. You talked about why that seems kind of iffy. Some astronomers claim that the star-like objects that were dancing around in the sky were in fact just stars. Again, you'd think trained military personnel, they can look at stars and go, okay, those are moving, those are not. Yeah, okay, John Burroughs, one of the airmen, he said that he thought that the light was coming from the local lighthouse at the time, and that the animal noises were more than likely made by the local muntjac deer that live in the forest. I guess they can make all kinds of crazy noises. I don't know what a muntjac deer sounds like.
Never heard of that, but okay.
Some believed it was a Russian satellite that got downed and was recovered by the U.S. Air Force. And obviously, if that were the case, we wouldn't be telling the truth about what happened anyway.
Right.
But again, you have the Suffolk police. They got called in. You have, the Halt affidavit, which he swears to this day, that happened. And in 2010, he signed the affidavit believing that it was, that it was extraterrestrial. I guess one of his superiors, Colonel Ted Conrad, he issued a statement saying that nothing like what Halt had seen had ever been seen, neither on the sky or on the ground, and that Halt should be ashamed and embarrassed for his claims. So
shame on you for telling the truth.
Yeah, I mean, even the people like Halt clearly believe in what happened, and he's shamed for it.
Well,
and
again, you mentioned a fireball, a meteor or something that crashed. We had red lights, we had blue lights, we had green lights, orange lights.
You have multiple servicemen.
You have this vessel that they followed hovering 12 inches above the ground, moving in and about the trees. I don't know about you, but when a meteor or asteroid falls, it falls.
Usually just stop.
It just kind of stops
They pick a
abruptly,
place
maybe
to-
digs
to-
through the
to
ground a
rest.
little bit if it's big enough. So again, these things don't make sense. What we're talking about may also not make sense to us, but to just throw something on the wall and see if it sticks, I think that's what's going on here.
Well, these people, they propose all these strange and exotic ideas, but none of them really match up with what was described that day by multiple eyewitnesses.
Yes, yeah.
Well, if you go to Rendlesham Forest now, it has a UFO trail. And on that trail is a life-size flying saucer that does have some hieroglyphics inscribed on the side of it.
That are not 3 foot tall, by the way.
They're probably not, no. But it's on, it's like a, well, I
Almost
guess it
like
would
a
be,
tourist destination kind of thing.
well, I was going to say, I found it on, I guess it would be like the equivalent of a United States State Park kind of website. I guess they have a very similar thing for
I believe they
England.
even have like a camping area there.
So, yeah, apparently when Rendlesham Forest has, I don't want to say they've embraced it, but if you're going to put a life-size UFO out there, you must be comfortable with saying something happened.
Yeah. So kudos to the Brits for at least acknowledging this.
It's Christmas time, and I know as part of most Christmas traditions, a lot of people say they see all kinds of strange stuff flying through the sky.
It
So
wasn't Santa, we
I'm
don't
sure,
think at this point
these
in time.
guys weren't expecting to encounter a UFO that night. But again, like I said at the beginning, our servicemen and women, they're out there serving our country. We don't get political on this podcast. We try not to. So
yes.
respect, that these guys volunteer to do what they do. And some of them, they don't get to be at home with their family. They get to be out on Christmas night chasing UFOs through the forest on foreign soil without weapons, not knowing what they're going to come up against. What if it had been the Russians?
Yeah.
If it had been the Russians, they were out there without weapons.
Russians would have probably had guns. I'm just going to go out there and say
if it had been them. Again, I think we're showing our age when we talk about the Russians being the bad guy, but if you live through Cold War times, that was the big bad guy at the time. Before the war on terror, you had the Cold War, and that was our big enemy of the day. So yeah, these guys, no matter what happened, you ought to say, even though the ones that went out searching for this, those were some brave folks, as they went out there unarmed, not knowing what they were getting ready to walk into. So you got to respect that, if nothing else.
Well, then you have Jim Pendleton that is actually probably taking ridicule for doing his job and trying to stand up and
for halt and getting ridiculed and shamed for standing up and saying, hey, this is what we saw.
How dare you dream up this crap and blasphemy the military. But again, like I said, it wasn't too long ago that the military basically said it never existed, and then just in the last 5-10 years they've come forward with actual military footage from our aircraft.
Let's go back to our episode about Roswell. When you look up Roswell, you very rarely find Roswell UFO crash.
Yeah, it's been censored.
The Roswell balloon incident. They've done their best to take any mention of UFO out of that particular event, regardless of what happened. They've kind of done their best to say, no, when a UFO was balloon.
Tuned that down.
This seems like one where there was just so much going on, they couldn't chalk it up to, it wasn't a balloon, it wasn't a fireball, it wasn't the lighthouse. There's too much going on.
It wasn't those rascally rabbits.
It might have been the muntjac.
The muntjac deer. That's what we're going to blame it on.
Yeah, again, like I said, Christmas night, these guys are roaming around out in the woods. I imagine it was cold, probably snow on the ground. I don't know. I would guess for that time of the year. So again, if nothing else, you got to appreciate the bravery of these guys going out there trying to figure out what this was. And for what they encountered and what some of them have had to put up with over the years, good on them.
Kudos to them. Well, we hope that you've enjoyed we'll call it our Christmas special in Rendlesham Forest.
Before we go too far, I know we do this a lot on our particular podcast, but this will be our last episode of 2021. So here's hoping, cross your fingers, that 2022 gets better. Although, all signs are not pointing to yes right now.
The bottle's still spinning.
Again, Eric, I say thank you to the listeners, the people. We
Absolutely.
do this for fun. We enjoy this. We were talking to someone just the other day, and we were explaining how this started out as just me and Eric having these conversations anyway, and then saying, I'd started listening to podcasts. We got to talking about it, and you're like, why don't we do that? Why don't we do a podcast? And I'm like, and to be honest, I was very resistant to the idea, and I kind of put it off. And then we just said, okay, we're going to pick a day and we're going to start doing this.
We finally just jumped off the cliff.
So I know we've got about 30 to 50 loyal listeners out there, maybe more, just looking at the downloads. And so we appreciate each and every one of you.
Thanks for bearing with us.
And I know my brother and sister plug us all over the place, whether they listen to all the episodes or not. So for those people, for those of you listening, we appreciate it. That's the reason we do it, because we're trying to tell a good story, and we hope you guys enjoy that. And again, I know we've said this before, we're always fishing for ideas. You can reach out to us on our Facebook page and then let us know.
Please follow us on Facebook. We kind of let out some teasers and share some additional footage and some different things there.
Well, yeah, every now and then we find a link that's definitely in line with what we do. And Eric, thank you for finding time to spend talking to me about these ridiculous topics we come to love.
It goes both ways, and thank you for doing all your editing. Bill, again, he doesn't get enough credit. After we're done here in the recording studio, he still has hours and hours of putting together and trying to clean up and give us the best copies to listen to out there. So I definitely appreciate it.
I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but I think we sound pretty good. I think we've gotten better. That's for sure.
We've improved. Please stay tuned for more. And this is just yet another example of what you'll find on Nightmares on the Lost Highway. Thanks for listening. Would like to give a shout out to our first paying sponsor, Raven's Loft. That's our family shop here located in Lebanon, Missouri. It's your one-stop gaming, vintage toy, and collectible shop where you can find Star Wars, Transformers, G.I. Joe, comics, vinyl records, role-play gaming, Magic the Gathering, and so much more. We're located here at 223 West Commercial, downtown Lebanon, and also in our second location, also here in Lebanon at the Heartland Antique Mall. We'd like to thank Ravensloft for, again, supporting Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.